We're going to go through a few slides to start, and then I will open the floor for questions from you guys. You are on mute, but you can chat in your questions in the box in the bottom right. We're keeping the questions in a moderated mode, so only we can see them to protect your privacy. The event board in the top right of your screen is where you can find our shared files. There are the slides from today and resources from today's event. There are also dialing instructions if you're having trouble with the audio. Within 24 hours, you will receive a follow-up email linking to the recording and the slides from today. If you have any questions, reach out to me at marketing@threadhcm.com. Today, we have Lori Winters, our CEO, Matt Mitchum, our COO, and Scott Massley, our CHRO. With that, I will turn it over to Lori.
Awesome. So thank you everybody for attending our town hall again. I really appreciate everybody continuing to support this. And as long as you guys are interested, we will continue to give as much information as we can and change things up as you guys give feedback. So we love the feedback. When you send your questions in, we use that to really tailor our information that we're going to send in, or that we're going to present to you. So please continue to do that. So quickly, of course, this got thrown in at the last minute for me, and I really like it. But if you didn't realize, today is Cinco de Mayo, and this is a really funny one. Imagine, if you will, a world where Cinco de Mayo falls on Taco Tuesday, only to be ruined by a virus named after a Mexican beer. So how interesting is that? Crazy. But that's the world we're in right now. So I want to wish you happy Cinco de Mayo for whatever that means today. We'll be celebrating here with tacos and maybe a couple margaritas. So hopefully you guys and your families will be doing the same. Anyway, quickly, agenda. Our goal here again is to get as much information out to you guys as possible in a very quick format, and then opening it up to your Q&A, to questions. So please make sure you're putting new questions in the chat, because we will try to answer every single one of them at the end of this. So quick agenda. We're going to do a little bit on the PPP forgiveness guidance. There's a little bit more that's come out, not a ton. I'm going to do a little bit on the employee retention credit, just because. Can you not hear me? Okay, sorry. We're going to do employee retention credit because we've gotten a couple more questions on that. So I'm sure there's some people on here that haven't been on here before. So I'll do a quick piece on that. And then Scott, who is our Chief HR Officer, is going to do a little bit on the getting back to work guidance, some unemployment woes that are going on out there that he has seen. And then we're going to do a little sample on what Thread is going to be doing for our return back to work, and then our open Q&A. So without further ado, I'm going to move into some of the info here. So PPP loan forgiveness, just very quickly, I've said this each time, but I want to make sure everybody's getting this. You have to submit a forgiveness application to your lender. The application is not yet available, of course. 75% needs to be spent on payroll costs, and only 25% of it on rent, mortgage interest, utilities, which gas, power, water, transportation, telephone, internet. There's still no additional guidance on some of these things, but I just want to make sure that I get this info out every time. And then you'll get a reduction in the forgiveness based on how many full-time equivalent employees you have now compared to the previous time period. You will also get some reduction in the forgiveness based on a reduction of wages greater than 25%. That only applies to employees making less than $100,000. But you still will have until June 30th to restore full-time equivalent numbers along with wages. So nothing really there has changed. I just want to make sure each time that we get that out for anybody that has not been on these before. So there's some new guidance. It continues to trickle in. There's not a lot of great information here yet, but something new that just came about was if you have employees that have been laid off or furloughed who do not wish to be rehired, you can exclude that employee when calculating the forgiveness. So you can exclude that employee count when calculating your forgiveness. Some companies have seen that as they have furloughed or laid people off, they are not willing or able or do not want to come back to work. And so there have been a lot of questions about that you can exclude that from your numbers when calculating the forgiveness. This is new, it just came out. You must have made a written offer to rehire them in good faith, and we have a sample of that in the event board that you can download. You have to offer to rehire them at the same salary or wage and number of hours. And you've got to have some documentation needed about the employee's rejection of coming back and being rehired. So that is some new guidance that's come out. Another piece that's come out, the SBA is starting to crack down on companies that are asking for these PPP loans that may not need them or have access to other liquidity. So they have now announced that they will audit in detail and review all loans over $2 million. And they also they've left in there the ability to audit others as they decide that they want to confirm that money was needed. So if you determine right now that the money really was not needed for your company, you just went ahead and applied for it and you've received it or not, but it's not needed to stay in business right now, you have until May 7th to repay in good faith. So I've heard of a couple companies that jumped on board, applied, got the money, but then realized their business had not been affected. So they're concerned about it not being forgiven, and they have decided to repay that. So that is new. That's new guidance. The another piece that's come out is we knew that the forgiven amount will not be considered income, but the IRS has made an announcement that it will also not be considered to be deductible on taxes. So the money spent that you were given, if it's forgiven, that are going to paying employees and rent will not be deductible on your tax return. There is the AICPA is trying to change some of this, and they're also trying to get more guidance. So we will see what happens in the coming days. I don't know why it's a little frustrating we don't have more guidance on this. I think this SBA was supposed to have 30 days, and I think that expired April 25th or 26th, but we're still waiting on new guidance. So we'll see. And as it comes out, we will get it to you guys for sure. Documentation needed, and this is all we know so far. Documents verifying the number of full-time equivalent employees on payroll and their pay rates. Payroll reports from a payroll provider. So if you're our client, you'll be able to get all this data from us. And if you're not, just make sure you're staying in contact with your payroll provider I'm sure they have the documents that you'll need. Payroll tax filings, as an example, 941s, state, Department of Labor returns. Documents verifying any retirement and health insurance contributions. So make sure you're just keeping really good records. I say it every time. Just, we need to over document. And then documents verifying mortgage interest, rent, and utility payments, such as canceled checks, payment receipts, statements, even bank statements. So just make sure that you're keeping as much documentation as possible as we wait for the new guidance. Somebody asked a question on the employee retention credit, and I know there's several of our clients that found this to be more important to them and more valid than the PPP loan, because they knew they were not going to be able to get back to the same number of employees by June 30th, and they were going to be substantially lower than that. So they decided to go with the employee retention credit. You're eligible if your company was partially or fully shut down due to the pandemic. And there's some definitions around that, but not a whole lot of clarity on what that means. Or greater than 50% decline in gross receipts compared to the same quarter in 2019. Once gross receipts go above 80% compared to the same quarter in 2019, they're no longer eligible after the end of that quarter. So you have one quarter that you go above 80% to still utilize it. You get up to 50% of qualifying wages up to $10,000. So what that means is up to $5,000 per employee of wages. If you have greater than 100 employees, the credit only applies to wages paid to employees that are being paid but not working. Where I think this is, so if you've got over 500 employees, it could be your only option. If you have fewer than 100 employees, this could be really valuable because the credit is for wages paid to all employees. You immediately get the credit by reducing your total tax deposit, which would include employee withholding as well. And if you've applied the whole tax deposit and you still need more to cover those wages up to 5,000, you can apply for an advance credit by filing what's called a Form 7200. This is not like super easy to understand, and I put together a calculator. So if anybody wanted information on this, I'd be glad to share the little calculator that I put together, a spreadsheet that would show you whether, how much money this could be for you. So with that, I am going to hand off to Scott, our CHRO, and he's going to go into the next piece, which everybody wants to know is about returning to work.
All right. Thanks, Lori. I appreciate it. A lot of questions right now are starting to come up about bringing employees back and what do companies need to do to prepare for that. And there are a lot of pieces to that puzzle, but I don't want you to get overwhelmed with all of the information. There's so much out there. Just try to think, how can I simplify this and apply it in a practical way? Yeah.
Yeah, sorry. I saw somebody say, are you talking? I cannot hear. I just want to make sure that, can somebody just chat that you are listening? You can hear Scott. Yes. Okay. I think somebody's having some issues on the audio, but it sounds like everything's okay. Go ahead, Scott. Sorry.
Okay. No problem. I'm back. So one of the questions that I'm getting a lot is, do we need to modify certain policies that we have, or do we need to create policies if we don't have them? If you don't have any policies around these areas, then it would be a good idea to create maybe something simple that's like a COVID-19 temporary policy where you can address some of these things. We have samples of these that we've sent out before, and we can send again as well if somebody needs them. One of the things we do with our HR services with Red Engage is help companies develop policies, forms, processes, things like that. So policies to look at would be, do you have the Families First Act policy, which is the one that talks about the emergency paid sick leave and the expanded, paid FMLA leave? Because you may need to communicate that to employees if they have not already used it all. There may be opportunities now when companies are asking employees to come back to work, where you have some employees who say, I can't work because of my childcare needs, and then they may need to use that leave. So it's good to have that policy in place, and those samples are out there. Some companies have looked at being a little flexible with their PTO policies, maybe allowing people to use a little more of it without deducting, maybe allowing them to roll over when they normally wouldn't roll over, or spacing out the timing of the use of PTO and that kind of thing. I've even had clients talk about limiting a little bit of PTO use when employees come back, if they come back during the second half of the year, to keep everybody from cramming a year's worth of paid time off into half of a year. So you just need to talk about that with your team or your HR person, get that straightened out. Work from home policies, we have samples for that as well. If you don't have one, I would suggest that if you are having employees work from home, even if it's on a temporary basis, that you have a policy outlining what your expectations are for them. How often should they communicate? Are they expected to call in and attend certain meetings? Do they have deliverables that you're using to hold people accountable? Just think through all of those things. How are you handling reimbursement for office expenses at home? All those are things to think about. And attached to this town hall meeting, if you go up to the event board in the top right corner, there's an option called shared files. And when you go in there, like Barb mentioned, we attached the slides, but we also attached a attachment that says sample recall letter. But in that file, there's a sample recall letter. There's a sample policy change notice with an acknowledgement, as well as a couple other things. So you can see several resources in that one file that's attached to this. Travel policy, the White House guidance on the 3 phases of reopening the country, even though states have different timelines for those phases. In phase 1 and 2, they all say basically to limit travel for non-essential companies and workers, and you need to check state and city guidance for that to determine what your travel policy should be. You don't really want to force people to travel if they don't want to or they don't feel safe, because then if you expose them to something, that guess who they're going to point the finger at when they get back. So you just really need to think about those options and hold on a little bit longer. I know it's getting more challenging as time goes on. Safety guidelines, I'm going to spend a couple minutes about that. So I've gotten questions about what OSHA issues apply to us. And if you look at that link right there, osha.gov/COVID/19-19, there's a ton of information. There's even industry specific information for restaurants and hospitals and distribution plants and all kinds of things like that. So they get into pretty good detail about what's expected. In general, safety guidelines required by OSHA are covered under the General Duty Clause, which says that employers are required to provide a safe place to work. So they're expecting you to do whatever you need to do to create a safe place to work. And beyond that, there are specific required policies for some companies, things like personal protective equipment that talk about wearing masks or gloves, things like hazard communication or hazardous materials that get into chemicals that are used in the workplace and how employees are exposed to them. There's record keeping requirements. There's a respiratory protection program that especially applies to, dental offices, healthcare workers who are required to wear the masks. And one of the questions we got was, what if we're running out of the N95 masks or the mask we're required to wear? There's a specific memo that's been issued on that says you can use other NIOSH. Safety folks will understand that. NIOSH, it's the National Institute of Occupational Safety and Health, et cetera. They have approved masks that you can wear if the other masks are not, if you're out of them or you can't resupply them, you need to show that you made efforts to get those. And then you may be able to extend the use of the mask that you're using already. And that's okay in certain circumstances. So all of that is outlined in that memo. I would encourage you to check that out on the OSHA website. And then your entry protocols in terms of safety have to do with what are you going to require when employees come back to work? And some of that is, are you going to check temperatures outside the front door? Things like that. And I'll talk about a little bit more about that. So in terms of hiring and rehiring, what are the processes required to do that? Well, if you have furloughed employees, you can use this recall letter that we attached to the town hall today to just say, we're excited about you coming back to work, and here's the date and time and the details associated with that, your position and pay. Make sure you check with your benefits broker to confirm that people won't have any kind of waiting period. If you're rehiring employees who were laid off or terminated, you don't want to promise employees that they'll just go back on benefits day one, and then your broker says, no, actually, we have a 30-day period that applies here. So check with your broker about that before you communicate anything to employees. Furloughed employees who have not been separated, you can just bring them back. It's okay if you've changed policies, pay, that kind of stuff. You just get them to confirm the details in writing. Somebody asked me, how about an email? I think it's better to send the letter. And the one we have basically has a check yes or no box. Are you coming back? If people don't come back, then that can be a challenge. You have to talk to them about why they don't want to come back, talk to them about what you're doing for safety in the workplace, what precautions you're taking. And we'll talk about a little bit more in a second, but always keep up with your state laws as well, because they may have specifics about reopening and restrictions and screening and masks. All of that is covered in some of the state laws. So bang through some of the quick questions here. Can we require a test like a COVID-19 test before people come back to work? You are allowed to do that, yes, according to the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, the EEOC. But there are other issues that come along with that because it's considered a medical test. So what I've heard is, it is legal to do it, but it's probably not a great idea to do it, because you only want people using up those testing sites and those healthcare resources if they need it, not just because everybody wants to have one. So it's up to you on that. Can we check temperatures? Yes, you can check temperatures. I've heard different guidance on this, like if you have somebody outside standing behind a plexiglass cover with a hole in it where they can reach out and kind of do the little scan temperature across someone's forehead and pull their arm back. And what they're recording is like a eligible to work, yes or no. that. They're not writing down Scott Masley's temperature was this, this, or that, right? Because now that becomes a medical record, and you're opening up a whole can of worms with how you protect that information, who has access to it. And we're just trying to minimize and simplify things for our smaller business clients. So if you do decide to check temperatures, that's okay. You're just saying, is it over 100.4 or not? And are they eligible to come back to work safely? Yes or no? You're just checking off, basically, we did it, okay? Can you make people come back? You can push that issue a little bit. You got to be real careful with that. You've got to talk to them about why they're not wanting to come back. Is it because they're in the vulnerable part of the population? If they're elderly or older, or they have an immune situation going on, then you probably need to be more flexible with that and give them extended time. Look at if you've used the required leave already. If you have, do they have PTO available? If they've already used that as well, do you want to put them on an unpaid leave? Or if they're out because of childcare, are they eligible to use the expanded FMLA leave? There's all those things to think about. So if you're confused about any of that, make a phone call before you decide on that. So you want to be careful about that. But if people say you have a safe workplace, you've made the offer, it's reasonable, they're not sick, and they're just saying they don't want to come back, then you have to decide as an employer, are we going to give them a little bit of a grace period here to decide and ride this out? Or are we going to say, if you choose not to return, then we're accepting your voluntary resignation? And that's in this recall letter that we've attached. So you can edit that language to fit what you want to do. Can we make employees clean? You can require people as they come back to say, hey, we want you to use these, wipes to wipe down your keyboard and phone and things like that before you leave work each day, or in the morning and at the end of the day. But your cleaning crew should really be responsible for hitting the doorknobs and the other things that your employees communally hit all the time. So make sure you're talking with your contractors and whoever cleans your office about that. Cubicles, I don't think you have to run out and buy a bunch of new furniture. I would give this a little time before you do that, but it's totally up to you. I think if you feel like your employees would feel more comfortable having clear dividers between their workspaces and help you create a safer workplace, then that might be something to look at for sure. You're not required to do that, as long as you're practicing social distancing, and companies are doing things like staggering the work schedule as well. So when should we return is a really big question. That's up to you, kind of like you're picking up a theme here from the HR guy. It's up to you as a big theme here, but be careful with that. You don't want to force it too quickly, but I understand you have business concerns as well. There's CDC guidance about when people should be back in the group. So I would follow CDC guidance in terms of what position people are in and when they should come back or not come back. But in general, if everybody's totally healthy and you have the business and everything else, then you're just following the phases along with your city, state, or federal rules that are going out there. Unemployment claims, I looked up the stats this morning in Georgia. They, out of 1,369,421 claims filed in Georgia, 32% of those people have received their first payment so far. So week ending March 21st, $5 million was paid out, $5.9 million. Week ending April 25th, $155 million paid out. So you can see that's a pretty big increase there. They're handling a giant influx of claims. They also have quarterly reports coming out pretty soon, and that's why almost nobody can get in touch with them. The claim responses are all over the place. It's not unique to you. If you filed a claim for 5 people, one of them may be getting paid the whole time. Somebody may have not gotten paid at all. Some of them may have gotten paid, then not gotten paid. And it's very, very difficult for everybody right now to get explanations for that. The employer portal in Georgia, for example, doesn't even show how individual employee claim statuses are working. So just kind of be patient with that. Stay on top of it. As long as you keep filing for your employees when you're supposed to, then you're doing what you're supposed to do. Just let them know you're doing what you can. There's a thing called a work share state program. that I'll wrap up with. Georgia does not have that. Some states do. It's pretty tricky. It has to do with if you're reducing non-exempt employees' pay, then they can still get a percentage of pay on unemployment while they're getting paid working for your company. It's different than the partial unemployment claim. So you really have to research per state for that, because it's a policy that you have to, a program you have to apply for and get approved for to use. So I know that's a lot of information, but I am going to hand off to Matt Mitchum, our Chief Operating Officer, so he can talk a little bit about how our system is prepared to help you deal with all this.
Thanks, Scott and Lori. Saving the best for last. I'm kind of the eye candy at the end. I just go over like 2 slides, but to keep it fun on there. But to his point, we are working very closely, obviously, with our clients and making sure that we are staying up to date as quickly as possible. We've had a couple updates. Obviously, we are in a wait and see mode right now, as a lot of us are trying to figure out this forgiveness. What happens? How do I maximize it? I know these are questions that we have spoken to many of you over the last week. And so unfortunately, we are still tentatively looking for May 8th for our release date. So that is obviously coming here, and we're basing that off the guidance that we have as of the point of right now. So what we do plan on seeing is kind of our first edition that will be released on May 8th. And then as more guidance is in there, our developers will be working around the clock in 24 hours to make sure that those are available for you. And we will continue to keep you up to date with the latest. We've also done, for those that are doing the retention tax credit, you may notice in your environment, we've now split that report into 2 versions. Now that we've gotten more guidance that was released, I believe, on the 30th, there is now a report for 100 employees and below for you employers. And there's also one for 100 and above that will help calculate those calculations based on the guidance that was issued. And then also, we mentioned this last week, but for several of you have decided to defer some of the ER Social Security taxes. You'll notice there is a new CARES Act tax deferment report that's now available. So if that is something you've decided, and Lori has mentioned this a couple of times, this is where we talked about where you can defer those taxes for 50% and to paid towards the end of next year, and then the 50 after. This report will start to accumulate that, so you can keep track of that for cash flow reasons. So just a couple updates on iSolved, and we will still continue to keep you updated. I know we sound like a broken record where we're waiting on guidance, and I think a lot of us are in that boat right now. One thing that we did want to talk about is a lot of this, we know it's still kind of a sip from a fire hose now as far as how do we return to work and what does that look like? And so we figured we'd just share a couple things that we're doing internally, and maybe some of this can be helpful for you. But there's kind of been 2 guiding principles as we are planning on our return to work plan. And the first one is, what do our customers need? And so, and I want to encourage you, in whatever business you're in, is to draw near to your clients. They will have a lot of the answers based on what and how fast you need to get back. For us, we assessed a lot of our customer support needs. We compared it to our internal systems, and what has been our ability to perform as a central factor for setting our return date. We're very fortunate. We've had a lot of kind of investment in internal employee systems and communication systems to where, in a lot of ways, our performance went up as we've been in a complete remote work from home. For us currently, we are tentatively setting a date for June 1st for us as a return to work. We have, because of being fortunate with some of our internal systems, we've not really had the urgency to get back. So again, just encourage you to ask some questions about your customers. They will help you figure out when is the best return to work, and how well your internal systems are going to be a lot of a measurement of what that does. And the second thing that is kind of a big guiding principle is, I say, draw near to your employees. This is a time to really monitor how they're doing, what they're doing. For us, we're issuing an internal survey that's administered this week, so that we're going to be assessing questions around work from home environments, current technology, what are your needs, what are your concerns and expectations, and our leadership team will be reviewing that to determine what is going to be our steps for that. I can tell you that most people will probably have a phased approach in certain levels until we get back to whatever the new normal may be. But for us, we are planning on having kind of a 6-foot distance. You guys may have heard of the 6-foot office or the 6-foot desk. But we do probably going to have a little bit of movement around the office to make sure that we've got some spread out space. So we're also going to be doing kind of a phased in, kind of a team split approach for the foreseeable future for the next couple of weeks until we see how we're tracking this summer. But one thing that we will say, and this is something that's consistent across us as a leadership team, and it's going to hit everybody a little bit differently, is work is going to fundamentally be different after this. And we do believe for a lot of environments that there's going to be more of a hybrid approach to work from home, where it used to be kind of a nice thing to do for employers. We believe it's going to be a retention tool, a recruitment tool. And we do feel that online and video is here to stay. So we're going to be working on a hybrid work from home model for our staff, to where we're going to try to balance that performance and flexibility. For many of you probably that have been to work from home, there's that initial adrenaline rush where the whole company has been responding, but that adrenaline does run out eventually, and performance starts to take over and the normal habits and their routines. So for us, one of our big approaches is, as we do this hybrid work from home, we are going to just lean really closely into our leading indicators and let our numbers do the talking to see how well we're able to do that, and then adjust accordingly. But our goal is to try to give as much flexibility to our staff and to our employees while still maintaining our high levels of performance that we require and to support our clients. So without that, I think that's about all that we have on our side of some of the things that we're doing, and we want to leave the rest of the time for you guys and for questions. So with that, Lori, I'll turn that over to you and Barb for questions.
Yeah, thank you. We hear some dogs barking. So yeah, we're asking, I was supposed to start this off by saying, please give us a little bit of grace when it comes to things from working from home. And I'm sure that was Scott's dog, who is named after Herschel Walker. And, you know, he's a UGA player. That's the problem. You can't keep him under control. So, so anyway, I'm going to turn this over to Barb and let Barb ask the questions that have already come in.
All right, Lori. Thanks.
Go Jacket. Yes.
Can we remove that person from the webinar? I'm just kidding.
Lori, Cherie asks, can the Paycheck Protection Program funds be used to pay for health benefits and 401k administrative fees?
Okay, so the PPP funds so far can be used for health insurance benefits for sure, and 401k retirement contributions for the employee and employer. I saw that question ahead of time, and I was trying to get an answer on the fees, because I know what you're talking about, the 401k administrative fees, and I don't have a final answer on that, but I will find out. I did some research, and I just don't think the guidance is clear on that yet. But definitely the health insurance employer cost and 401k contributions.
Awesome, thanks. Stephanie asked at the beginning while you were speaking, actually, full-time equivalent, 30 hours or 40 hours?
The guidance I have read is based on the SBA definition of full-time equivalent, which is 30 hours.
Great, thank you. All right, Scott, question from Barbara, great name. We have a small staff and can continue to work remote in staggered shifts. Will we need to do a healthy check on all employees that come into the office? Do they need to do it?
You don't have to do it. It's up to you if you want to do it. I've talked to some companies, like I said, who are doing temperature checks out in front of their building. And I've talked to some who mailed those thermometers home to each employee and said, please use this every day before you come in, and sign off saying that you're going to use that and that you won't come in if you have a fever above a certain point, all that. And then I've talked to some companies who just said, we're communicating with our team that they need to self-monitor and self-report. So you can see there's a pretty wide range of how companies are handling this. And it's kind of up to you, how do you do it, unless your state or city orders require that you do that kind of screening in place. There are some localities that are requiring a little bit of screening, and it's usually industry specific, healthcare related, that kind of thing. But other than that, you don't have to do it. It's a good idea to do one of the variations I mentioned.
Okay. And then Janelle asked, what level of PPE should be expected when meeting with clients in person? I know that you've actually had experience with this already.
Yeah, I think, for now, it's part of it is safety and part of it is PR as well, right? Because you want to keep your employees safe, but you also want to keep other people safe. So I think notifying people in advance when we meet, I will probably be wearing a mask or something like that if that makes you feel better, makes them feel better, and is safer. And let them know not to expect handshakes or hugs or anything like that. And people can explain that in person if they want, if you've kind of communicated and trained everybody on that. I think in some industries you are required to wear the face mask and the gloves. So, but if you're not one of those industries, you just got to do what's best for you. But also realize that, I can tell you personally, I can't stand wearing the mask. It drives me nuts. It's sweaty and everything else. But there are certain places that if I go, I'm going to wear it because, you don't want to get the dirty looks and have people going, dude, you're not doing your part to protect us and minimize the risk here. So I'm going to do my part, even though it's uncomfortable and I prefer not to do it. I'm still going to do it. And that's the PR part. Whereas even though you might not be required to wear that mask or the gloves or whatever, it does send a message that, hey, I'm doing my part.
Awesome. Thank you. Lori, question from Marcus. PPP forgiveness. Do we need to prorate rent, utilities, payroll for the actual days during the 8-week period, or do we simply use invoice date that falls in the period, even if the invoice or payroll covers days that are outside of the window?
It's a good question. The guidance is not perfectly clear on what the dates are to be used. So the way that we're going about it right now is making sure that you include that your dates, whether it's going to be previous or current, just make sure that you've got 8 weeks worth of expenses in there. So 2 months worth of rent, 2 months worth of utilities, 2 months worth of payroll. And then one way or another, you're going to get the 2 months worth for the most part. But the guidance is not real clear on how the dates are going to work. Right now, we're looking at whenever the due date or the pay date, but that could change. Hopefully, we'll have more guidance soon on that.
Thank you. All right. Scott, Fran asked, I know you did touch on this a little earlier. She said she had an employee yesterday that said he's not returning, didn't want to do the work that we have right now. We told him that he'd be foregoing his position if he didn't return to work. What do you recommend when an employee says something like this? He basically resigned right there on the spot. I have my documentation, but I'm sure employers are going to run into this. How do you handle?
Sure, I think it's good that you have documentation because you need to have that. And then the recall letter we attach, that's why we put the spot where the employee has to check basically I'm coming back or not, and they have to return that back to you. So get some kind of documentation from the employee, even if they voluntarily resign and say I'm not coming back, say can you shoot me an email or a letter letting us know when you're not coming back and that kind of thing. So it is okay, but you need to let them know that they may also be forfeiting their unemployment benefits because there are people who think that they cannot come back to work and keep making, $800 or $900 a week on unemployment, which is not really the case. So if you have worked for them and you've offered it, and the guidelines are generally that you have a documented offer, the employee has not accepted it, refused it, then you let them know that you're taking them off of the unemployment claim if you're filing group claims. If you're not filing group claims and people are filing their own claims, then what you do is you still need to go on your state site and report job refusal, and that will usually knock them off of their unemployment claim as well. So they need to understand the consequences of what they're doing. Also recommend that people talk to, if you work with temp agencies or staffing companies or anything like that, what their plans are and how they're prepared to help you if you have a sizable amount of employees. Small business, even 1 or 2 people is a big deal. So if you have people who aren't going to come back, which we all know is going to start happening a little bit, then you need to be prepared to fill those positions. I know this is a long answer, but I've also heard from other people who are really excited about the talent that is now available on the market due to so many layoffs. And I know some people get a little upset when we talk about that because they say you're kind of taking advantage of the situation, but it is a pro of this circumstance that there are a lot of great people on the market now looking for jobs, and you can find some incredible talent if you're in the position to be able to hire.
All right. Thank you. I'll give you a break and turn it back to Lori. Lori, Mike wants to know, what is the average percentage of small businesses getting the PPP in Georgia?
I was so glad to get this. I saw this question earlier. So, of course, I had to go nerd out on the numbers, and I looked them up. So in Georgia, there were 113,000 loans PPP loans. The average, $124,000. Total, $14 billion. And then we've got in Georgia about 1.1 million small businesses, so that would be about 10%. But only about 280,000 of those employ people. So if you were looking at, I don't know, there were also self-employed, sole proprietors are able to apply for these as well. But it would be, if it were just employee companies that employ people, it would be about 40%. So that's the stats. Thank you for that question, though. That was kind of fun.
Okay, I've got a few on PPP forgiveness regarding the 100,000 cap. So Marcus asks, pay capped at 100K per individual, but can you count fringe costs like health and retirement in addition to the capped 100,000 pay, so that total payroll costs for an individual goes over 100?
Yes, that was new guidance that was issued a week or so ago. So you can use the 100,000 salary wages only, and you can go above that when you add benefits and 401k and costs like that. So the 100,000 is just the salary. So you will go above 100,000 when you add those other benefits in.
Okay. And then Linda wanted to know the formula for using the PPP loan for employees whose salary is over 100.
I think it sounds like that's the same question. Is you would use the 100,000 for the salary, and then you would add in the benefit cost and 401k contributions on top of that. I think that's the same question. If not, Linda, if you'll just put that in again, reiterate what the question is.
Okay, thanks. Scott, actually, I think you might have answered this before the webinar even started, but how do we deal with the PPE shortage and returning to work? Didn't you have a place where you could go look for PPE products?
Yes, I did. I did see that specific question in advance and sent a memo relative to that to the person who asked that question. But basically, everybody has the same problem right now. All the distributors, equipment distributors, and everybody else who normally supplies dental offices and hospitals or anybody else with disinfectants and masks and gloves and hand sanitizers and all those things. They're all struggling to keep up with the demand for the product, and they're all trying to source different areas and calling favors and that kind of stuff. So that's a challenge. The government has realized that for non-healthcare businesses or food businesses and things like that, it's a little different. But for the people who are required to wear personal protective equipment, they are starting to slowly address that issue because they understand that you would love to have them. You just can't get them sometimes. So they're starting to get flexible and even offer different options. For example, one of the options on the dental memo that I read was if you can't have people extend the mask wear, like wear it more than once, or wear alternative masks, or move your business outside. I've yet to go to a dentist appointment outside. That would be interesting. Then they talked about wearing almost like the welder mask, the big plastic shield with goggles, so there's a mask that's at least blocking some of the stuff. So they're starting to be a little bit flexible, but there is still an expectation that you'll keep employees safe, and that's the challenge.
Okay. Lori, Linda got back to us. She said, you touched on it last webinar about the way to calculate the difference of salary that goes over the 100,000 limit in order to include that in the repayment calculation for the PPP.
In the repayment calculation, I guess, is that the forgiveness? Are we talking about? You had touched on, let's see. So basically on the $100,000 piece, because I saw another question on that sounds similar, which is commission salespeople. This is from Janelle. Having commission salespeople that are going to make over $100,000 this year because of sales commissions. What I have read on the $100,000 for the 8 weeks of loan forgiveness is that you're going to have per employee, the max that you can pay out to that person is, if you take the 100,000 divided by 52 times 8, is $15,384. So that's the way that I have read the conversation about that, is that you would have you'd be maxed out on the loan forgiveness of what you get to pay out per person by the $15,384 figure. And I think that's the way that we should look at it when we're looking at how much can we pay out in that 8 weeks that would be forgiven.
Sorry.
I also saw a question. I'm going to jump on here. I saw a question that just came up about trash and waste removal and update on transportation costs. There's no real, I mean, they have not explained what can be included in that. I would keep those records for the trash and waste removal, because to me that sounds similar to the other pieces: gas, water, power. So I would definitely keep records for those, so that once the guidance is clear on it, you'll decide whether or not that's part of it. It seems to me that it should be, but who knows? And transportation, I've also seen some clarification, and this is not, if I don't see it on the SBA or IRS or Treasury site, then I don't believe it completely, because it's just people trying to determine what the meaning, what they mean by it. So I haven't seen anything clear on this. I have seen discussion that transportation could include, if you have work vehicles, you could include interest expense on those, on the cost of those work vehicles. But, and maybe gas and expenses like that on work vehicles, which I would assume would be part of it. But again, until I see it on the SBA website, I don't believe it. So I don't want to say for sure that that's the case, but that's what we're hoping.
Got it. Thanks. Scott, first of all, Joseph says, thank you for the sample back to work. They used it in their retail store. It's awesome. And then his question is, with regards to the Georgia DOL/unemployment, is there anything we can do as an employer to help our employees get their partial shutdown benefits? Like stated, we had a few that were getting it and a couple that weren't. A couple that are not receiving it are looking at them like it's their issue. Calls and emails to the Department of Labor are going unanswered. How can we do something from the employer side to help our employees?
I would say there's not much more you can do to facilitate payment of the claim. You can tell, like in Georgia, they've only 32% of all the people that have applied have received their first payment. So there's a lot of people out there who have claims that have been going on for over a month who have yet to receive their first payment. And almost every employer who has claims is going through the exact same thing, saying, what can I tell the people who are not getting paid, right? So I think it's important to communicate with them that you are doing your part, that if you're in a place where you're filing on their behalf, to say, I did file on for you. I've submitted a successful claim every single week. I've had clients who were notifying the employees on that list every week when they file to say, I successfully uploaded the form and the claim has been filed for this week, just to let them know I'm doing my part. I'm doing my part. It's also okay to let them know that you're calling and trying to get in touch with folks and you've had no luck, because they're having the same experience. Now, most states on their site have a place where individual employees can log in and check the status of their own claims, even if that information is not available to employers. That's good in some states, not good in some states, or just some places don't have much information in there. They're operating on old technology and they're completely overwhelmed. I have tried the Department of Labor, the commissioner's office, the governor's office, every unemployment phone number there is. I mean, for about 3 weeks, I've been calling, emailing, submitting online forms, trying everything I can find. When people say, here's a direct number to a person, I've tried all of that and still I'm getting nothing but busy signals. So you just got to let them know you're trying your best, and they can check their individual status if possible and confirm that you have filed the claim and done what you're supposed to do to help them out. And let them know that it's crazy for everybody, not just them.
Thanks, Scott. Lori, Marcus wants to know regarding the PPP loan. They're nonprofit with some reserves and or endowment. They're expecting the pandemic to severely impact revenue over the next several months, but they might have the liquidity to maintain payroll and pay utilities without assistance over the next 10 weeks. Should they be concerned about accepting the loan?
I think the spirit of the loan was, if your business is going to be affected, and I think that, it depends on the size too. I think businesses over that receive more than 2 million need to be really, really careful about that. if they're owned by public companies, if they're owned by other businesses and have investors that could put money in very easily. I think that is going to, we just don't know. It's not fair that we don't have all the guidance yet. It's really frustrating because most companies don't know what to do. But in that case, if it's going to be severely impacted, but for 10 weeks you're okay, that's a lot of companies out. I mean, there are some that just couldn't make it through at all because their businesses have been totally shut down. But there's a lot of businesses who are going to be affected, and there could be a lag in that. So, my belief, and this again is my belief, it's not completely clear, would be that if you're going to be able to show that your business was affected, that you should be okay. I think that the clamp down right now is on businesses that are booming. So there are some industries, and we've seen this, there are some industries that are booming right now, and their business may not be affected, but they still wanted to apply for a loan that could be forgiven. That's what they're really trying to crack down on. So I would feel pretty comfortable that would be okay. I mean, I think what you could do is, before you spend the money, within that 8 weeks, hold on to it. There's got to be more guidance that's coming in the next week or so. I mean, it just has to. So you could just hold it, and you can always pay it back.
Okay. Thanks.
Clear as mud. I wish I had a definitive answer. It's real frustrating.
I'm going to ask you to take a look at the moderated chat. We have a pretty detailed question in here from Maureen. And while you're reviewing that, I'm going to ask Scott a question from Wendy. She says, we have several employees that have been working from home with small school-age children. Schools in our area are closed for the year. How can we handle returning to work orders with them if the school year isn't over and daycare summer camp facilities are not operating yet? We're in Georgia. Productivity has not been as efficient in the home setting as it has been in the office.
Yeah, that's a tough, very tough situation, and probably one of the toughest situations that I think employers are going to have to deal with for a little while, because if you have employees who have who are eligible for the emergency paid sick leave, or the expanded FMLA paid leave, then you've got to let them use that if they're eligible for it. And the expanded family medical leave is only for people who cannot work from home or telework because of their childcare situation. They don't have people to care for their kids, or schools closed, and that specifically applies to them. So if they're eligible to use it, you've got to let them use it. And that means they're on job protected leave as long as you're in business. So they're out on leave that's job protected. In that case, you have to find somebody to fill in for them temporarily using a temp agency or staffing company or something like that if you still want to fill those roles. Or if you have people who can work from home, then that really doesn't apply to them. But then if they're making the argument that they cannot work now you got to be real careful with that decision on what you decide to do with them. So you've got to investigate. In general, with any employee who's saying they can't come back to work, you've got to take time to figure out why, talk with them about the reasons. Is it safety? Explain to them what you're doing to create a safe workplace, what the protocols you're putting in place are. And if they still say they're not safe, then you have to determine, are they in a vulnerable demographic of the population where maybe they are encouraged to do the thing that they're now calling safer at home. So all this new language is coming into our lexicon, shelter at home started, or shelter in place. And now the next phase is safer at home, which is you are allowed to go out to certain places, but it's still safer to be at home. So you just have to follow along with that, do the best you can, and, call us directly if you have specific questions that you want to talk about. Sorry, I couldn't be more helpful with that. That's a tough situation.
We got it. Thanks, Scott. Lori, you ready?
Yeah, this is a tough one. The question is, this is a combo kind of question, because the question is, if this company pays monthly and at the end of the month. So based on when they got the loan, they would only have really one full month to be able to pay payroll. And the question is, could they change just the June payroll date to June 28th? Should they change all months' payroll dates to June 20 or to the 28th, or change to a biweekly mode just during this 8-week time period? So, the spirit of the loan was to be able to pay 2 months worth of payroll. So I don't see a problem. And again, this is not a legal, I don't have the legal ability to say this for sure because the SBA hasn't come out with full guidance on it. But the spirit of it was to be able to pay 2 months payroll. So I can't imagine it being a problem that you pay the June payroll for June 28th. I was going to ask Scott to chime in on, is there any repercussion for changing a pay date for 1 month from the end of the month to the 28th? I can't imagine that there is.
No, and I have talked to clients who asked kind of this question before, should we adjust? And so far, in the absence of all this extra forgiveness clarity, I have said, if it were me, I would get my pay date in during that 8-week period.
Right.
It's up to you, but if it were me, I would make a little adjustment and just tell people, look, you're going to get a little extra money in advance, which means you're going to make less on the next check. And you need to plan for that or whatever you need to do. It's kind of hard administratively, but I think it's possible. We're hoping that forgiveness clarity will come out in time that companies won't have to make those kinds of adjustments. But if that doesn't come out and we never know, then if it were me, I would be safe and get my money spent in that 8-week period. The only thing you need to do is communicate to your employees. Some states have requirements where you have to give notice if you have any change in the frequency of pay or anything like that because of their, they have to plan for their bills and all that kind of stuff. So you need to check your state to see if they have notice requirements. That's about it.
And I mean, in this case, Scott, they're basically talking about moving up a pay date by a couple days. I can't imagine there being a problem with that. And like I said, the spirit of the loan program was to get 2 months worth of payroll in. So.
Yep. And Lori, to our point too, we've talked to several of our clients that are on this call as well. Our advice is, again, until this is on there, is to keep it as consistent, at least with this upcoming payroll. Don't start getting tricky and moving stuff around yet until the guidance, because again, by the time we get to this payroll that's going to be on the tail end of this 8-week period, you're going to have a lot more clearance and guidance on that. And to Lori's perspective, however the line gets cut, the ultimate goal is that you're going to have 2 months worth of expenses covered.
Right.
Thank you. And Lori, question from Michael. I think we had a question similar to this last week, but PPP forgiveness application, what if an employee quits during the 2-month period and the position hasn't been filled yet? We did not lay off or furlough anyone.
Yeah, I think that again has not been addressed specifically, but in the recent Q&A that's out there that covers someone who was laid off and does not want to be rehired, I would feel pretty confident that will be covered the same way. Because if someone were to leave the company and quit, and you can't backfill them quick enough, and we all know how hard it is to hire people, it takes a little bit of time, then I can't imagine it's not going to be in a similar situation to the layoff and the person doesn't want to come back to work. If they leave and you're down by an employee, when it comes to the employee count, they haven't specifically addressed that yet, but it could be under the same, to me, it's the spirit of the same question. So I would think so, but we'll see.
All right. Well, I don't see too many more questions that we haven't gone over. There are a lot of questions about sample policies. We do have a few of those under the event board in the top right-hand corner of the screen. You will get a copy of it in the follow-up email. And Scott and I are working on coming up with an all-encompassing area where you can have all sorts of things like furlough layoff letters, return to work checklists. But if there's anything after we get all that sent out that you guys are still looking for, please, please, please feel free to let us know, and we'll make sure that we find the solution for you.
Yeah, again, thank you guys so much for tuning in, and we'll keep having these as long as you guys want information. And when you submit questions, that's how we tailor what we're going to talk about. So please give us feedback and submit as many questions as you have. If we get guidance that is out before the next, we're going to plan on doing these every Tuesday at 11. If we get any new guidance that's very important before that, we will do something sooner. But just to let you know, our plan is to do this on Tuesdays at 11. So please submit your questions and we'll tailor to that. So thanks a lot, everybody. And Barb.
You can get in touch with us at our website, threadhcm.com. You can email marketing@threadhcm.com, or you can call us at 678-366-3447.
Great.
All right, guys. Thank you so much.
Thank you guys so much.
Thank
Happy
you.
Cinco de Mayo. Fun today.
Happy Mayo.
All right, bye.
Bye.